Lifting only days are a huge component of a successful GPP, General Physical Preparedness program, and are one of the staples of Team Misfit's affiliate programming. Usually once a week, we are going to ask athletes to come in and just lift weights, whether that's a back squat, deadlift, press, one of the slow lifts, or an Olympic lift. We want to have days where we're dedicated just to getting athletes really, really strong or really, really powerful. Sometimes athletes balk at this. They want to get sweaty. They want to elevate their heart rates a lot, but we need to communicate the benefits of these sorts of days. When we get really heavy, we can make massive neuroendocrine changes on athletes at the cellular level. We can increase their metabolism, we can increase muscle mass, we increase bone density. We have a tremendous host of benefits to these weightlifting only days, especially if we can get athletes lifting heavy. When we're warming up for these days, it's really important that we kind of focus our attention where it needs to be. These 3 bullet points here apply to pretty much any class where we want to go through a general warm-up, we want to go through some activation and movement prep, and a specific warm-up teaching athletes the movement, but where we put our focus is really the difference. So when we start talking about warming up for lift-only days, we're going to go through general warm-up, activation stuff, and then the specific warm-up, getting athletes primed for the actual movement that they're gonna do in class. So the first portion of any successful warm-up to a lift-only day is getting athletes generally warm. And the idea here is just that. We are just waking athletes up. We are telling athletes to start moving their bodies in such a way that athletes are telling their bodies, hey, we're about to intentionally stress to create a stressful environment so that we can create change. So in general, it's not too difficult to write one of these warm-ups as far as we're thinking of including machines, we're thinking of including active range of motion drills or body weight exercises, basically movements that are going to take athletes through similar or the same ranges of motion that they're about to do, but in a low intensity setting, low impact until the athlete is sufficiently warm. We're also looking to lubricate the joints for range of motion, right? So we wouldn't ask an athlete to come in for their 5 a.m. class and start back squatting with an empty bar and then add some weight. We're going to ask them to move with a machine, move through some body weight ranges of motion, maybe some active range of motion drills, just to lubricate the joints and stimulate the blood flow. A couple of the best ways that we like to do this is through combination of basically cardiovascular machines, whether it's a machine or jogging. If we're going to do some lower body intensive lifting, obviously we want to make sure that we're biking, jogging, maybe even rowing, that sort of thing. Maybe we wouldn't ski, for example, on that day. If we're doing something more upper body intensive, like a bench press or a strict press, that might be a great day to incorporate skiing, where we can also get some skill work in there. We want to include active range of motion drills, things like hip openers, basically trying to move joints through their end ranges of motion so that they're prepared to handle load next. And then of course we have body weight exercises and kettlebells. Kettlebells are actually a really sneaky, easy warm-up movement because they don't require, particularly like a kettlebell swing, doesn't require a tremendous amount of warm-up before, provided athletes are choosing an appropriate weight, but it allows them to stimulate kind of that power output, that aggressive hip extension that we need so often in the Olympic lifts and even the slow lifts that we use in CrossFit. So we're looking for general warm-up, machines, body weight exercises, maybe the incorporation of kettlebells. And because this is a lift-only day, we only might do this for in the neighborhood of 4 to 8 minutes, because we also know that once we get into the activation and the specific warm-up, that is going to continue to warm athletes up as well. So we just want to get athletes moving to start, and then we'll move on to some activation and movement prep. So once we finished our general warm-up, we move on to some activation and movement prep stuff. And for lift-only days, I think this is the most important segment of the warm-up. Obviously making sure the other ones are in place, but this is where we can really kind of alert the body about what's about to happen. We need to make sure that our core and our major movers are prepared to support heavy loads. Our central nervous system needs to be woken up through things like eccentrics, through things like jumping. For our midline and core, things like planking, glute bridges, bird dogs, basically stimulating kind of the nervous system in such a way that says like, hey, wake up, we need you to hold on for heavy loading, we need you to brace, we need you to protect our lower back, protect organs, all that sort of stuff. So we're looking to activate major muscles, major movers, things like, again, glute bridges, banded glute activation, core stability, and that can include shoulder as well. Remember, in the context of CrossFit, when we're thinking core, we're thinking like hips and shoulder girdle. So if we're going overhead, say for a jerk or a push press, we might benefit from performing some exercises that stimulate some of the smaller muscles in the shoulder to create stability. If we're using something for pulling from the floor, like a very heavy deadlift, we obviously need to make sure that our core, our midline, our glutes, our hamstrings are warm, and all of those things can be done through basics like eccentrics, thinking about something like a banded good morning where athletes are under control on the way down and then stand up quickly. Jumping is an awesome way to stimulate the central nervous system to move fast and explosively. And then stabilization, things like planking, bird dogs, glute bridges, IYTs with the overhead stuff, banded pull-aparts, all of those things contribute to making sure those small muscles are prepared to stabilize large loads overhead or, in a squat position, bottom of a squat, whatever it is you happen to be doing. So remember, activation and movement prep, this is where we are waking up the muscles and the central nervous system to be prepared to handle heavy loading. We are going to do that before we move on to the movement-specific warm-up where we start to fine-tune movement patterns. So we've taken athletes through their general warm-up, got blood flowing. We've activated the major muscle groups that we're doing based on the day. Now it's time to prime the movement pattern itself. So all of this stuff should be coach-led, especially this specific warm-up where we are kind of analyzing where athletes are falling short, what things need to be focused on. Maybe the group as a whole there's a trend within a group as a whole, and we can address that as the coach to everyone at the same time. But in general, this is where we start taking athletes through the actual movement, whether it's through with a PVC pipe, an empty barbell, whatever. We're looking to prime the movements. We're looking to reestablish sound mechanics. So assuming most of the athletes in your class have been in your class before, right? You have an idea of how they move and what they need to work on. But here it's like, if we don't snatch every single day, it makes sense that we need to kind of start from scratch, reestablish what the snatch looks like, the overhead squat position, kind of remind athletes of these things, okay? So we're basically focusing on the mechanics, in that mechanics, consistency, intensity triad there. We're accumulating reps. Lots of athletes don't like to accumulate too many reps because they think it's going to make them tired before the lifting session. If we do this with a light enough weight, a PVC pipe or an empty barbell, and we want athletes accumulating reps, okay? There's no reason to say, hey, we're not going to practice the lift. We're not going to worry about sound mechanics because I don't want you to be tired for the lifting. If an athlete's tired for the lifting, then we need to get their fitness up. But we need to warm them up appropriately through rep accumulation so that they are establishing the correct mechanics and consistency of these lifts, okay? Positional work, really important for the Olympic lifts. We like to start basically from ground zero every time. It's just a matter of how quickly we go through the warm-up for athletes since they're experienced and they kind of know what's coming. But positional work is a terrific way to do this. Tempo work with pauses. This works particularly well if you're trying to establish or work on a very specific position of a lift. Maybe you're working on a slow lift like a back squat or a deadlift where we're using the tempo and the pause to make sure athletes' weight distribution is appropriate or they're sequencing the movement correctly. And then we want to indicate to athletes how they should be building up from an empty barbell to the weight they're going to use. If we're expecting athletes to lift 90%, 90 to 100 or more, establishing a new 1 rep max for the day, they need to have an idea of how to build up to that weight appropriately. And generally, once they start with the empty bar, the lighter weights, we use more reps. As athletes stack weights onto their bar, they're doing fewer reps, but they're making smaller jumps. So those bigger jumps happen early, smaller jumps as they get closer to their working weights, but we want to make sure athletes know that they should be taking multiple kind of jumps to get to their starting weight so that their bodies are gradually kind of easing in to the workload ahead. So there you have it. Warming up for a lifting only day includes those 3 main components. We're looking to generally warm athletes up with some blood flow, using cardio machines, body weight exercises, active range of motion to make sure the joints are ready to go through the ranges of motion that we're expecting. Then we move on to the activation and movement prep stuff where we're starting to activate both the major movers and the smaller stabilizing muscles so that those muscle groups are prepared to stabilize and support weight and also protect our vital organs and spine. After that, we move on to the specific warm-up where we're asking athletes to reestablish the mechanics of whatever lift that we're doing today, demonstrate consistency with those light weights, and then gradually build up until they are at their working weight. Give those 3 things to your athletes to make the most successful lifting days possible. We do this weekly at teammisfit.com with those weightlifting only days. If you like hearing this sort of thing, head to teammisfit.com, subscribe, get your gym really fucking strong.